Have you ever loved something, like an activity or a device, so much that it felt like your whole life depended on it? You couldn't go a whole day without it, and you could spend hours on that particular thing. For Daniel, it was Halo 3. This video game, that initially started as a trend among his peers, would eventually cause crisis in his home and lead to the loss of lives. Welcome back to YARO Crime. Today, we'll be looking at the disturbing story of Daniel Petric. If you enjoy this video, then please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel, as it really helps the channel out. Thank you. Daniel Petric, who was 16 at the time of our story today, was born on August 24, 1991. He grew up under the loving care of his father, Mark Petric, and mother, Susan Petric. In addition to Daniel, Mark and Susan also had 2 daughters, and they showered their love on all 3 children. Everyone who knew Daniel described him as a very normal and happy teenager. He was very friendly and fun to be around. He also had a lot of love for the Bible in his teenage years and kept himself out of trouble for the most part. He also did well in school, and even though he wasn't one of the brightest students, he made sure to put in an okay performance. Like a lot of teenagers, Daniel picked up an interest in gaming, and he soon grew very fond of it. His interest in gaming grew even more after he contracted a staphylococcus infection, following a snow skiing injury, and had to be homebound for a year while recovering from severe spinal damage. His TV and Xbox became his only companions. Even though Daniel's dad had nothing against video games, he had a resentment for the violent ones. This was no surprise, being that Mark was a Pentecostal minister, and it was also a thing of concern for parents at that time, with some parents going as far as banning certain games in their homes. But it was around this time that Daniel and his friend picked up an interest in Halo 3. For those of you who don't already know, Halo is a first-person shooter game that puts the gamer in control of an enhanced super soldier known as the Mater Chief, who must fight aliens and other parasites in space. It was quite popular in those days, and a lot of kids have fallen in love with the game. It was the best-selling game in 2007, had a very large fan base, and is still considered one of the best first-person shooters of all time. It was no surprise then that Daniel had taken a liking to the game, especially with all his friends playing it. With Daniel's gaming habit going unchecked, he continued playing and could play the game for 8 hours, straight every single day. His father later banned the game in his home, but that didn't stop Daniel, as he simply went over to his friend's house and continued playing. This resulted in some tension, building up between Daniel and his parents. Things began to get out of hand after Daniel asked his dad if he could get him a copy of Halo, which, as you could guess, his dad refused. This refusal definitely did not sit right with the teenager, and in an effort to control the situation, Daniel's dad gave Daniel an ultimatum, which was for him to choose between the game or moving out of the house. Daniel, being a narrow-minded teenager, chose to leave the house and move in with one of his friends. He and his friends played the game for up to 18 hours for several days, until his friend's parents grew concerned and insisted that Daniel move back to his parents' house. Things obviously did not get any better when Daniel got back home, as Mark stood his ground and did not withdraw his restrictions, which only served to increase the tension in the house. Daniel would go as far as sneaking out his bedroom window to purchase a copy of Halo 3. His father eventually found out and confiscated the game. This sparked a serious argument between the two and worsened the tension in the home. Now that he had Daniel's game, Mark had to think of a place to hide it. He decided to keep the game the safest place he could think of, which was the family safe. He kept it next to his Taurus P92 handgun and kept the key in a very secret location. Mark had assumed that things would settle down in the coming days, but little did he know that he was about to receive the shock of his life. The 20th of October 2007 began like every other weekend. The Petric family was expecting their elder daughter Heidi, so they could all watch the baseball game together. As the day went by and evening approached, Mark and Susan were sitting in the living room watching TV when Daniel walked in and asked them to close their eyes. He had a surprise, This was quite shocking to the couple, as Daniel had been in a sour mood since Mark had seized his game and the two had an argument. While the two sat on the sofa, waiting for the surprise, Mark heard Daniel walk towards him from behind and heard a familiar metallic click. Daniel had cocked the gun to the back of his head. Daniel had spent the past day searching for the key to the safe and now had his hands on the family gun. At this point, Daniel stepped into a world where his actions couldn't be reversed. He shot his father in the head, after which he fired 4 rounds at his mother. The bullet to his father's head amazingly didn't end his life, but unfortunately, the same couldn't be said for Susan. Coincidentally, it was at that moment that Daniel's elder sister Heidi returned to the house with her husband. After knocking at the door, Daniel came out to answer, but tried to persuade Heidi not to come into the house, insisting that their parents had gotten into a heated argument. But Heidi could hear her father moaning in pain and calling for help. She immediately pushed Daniel and made her way into the house. At this point, Daniel rearmed himself, but fortunately, Heidi's husband was quick to disarm him. They soon called the police, and Daniel fled the scene, but not before obtaining his Halo 3 CD. While Mark was fighting for his life, Daniel was apprehended and interrogated by the police. Although Mark had survived, he had slipped into a coma and was unconscious. Susan, on the other hand, had taken 3 shots, 1 to the chest, 1 to her right arm, and a final 1 to the head. It is believed that she died almost immediately. Daniel had initially insisted that his dad and mom got into an argument, and that's when he got the gun and shot his mom. After shooting his mom, his dad then pointed the gun at him, apologized, and shot himself. But after much pressure from the police, he eventually came clean and confessed to his evil deeds. Mark regained consciousness after about 2 weeks, only to awaken to the sad news of his wife's death and the loss of some of his body functions. Not surprisingly, Mark initially despised his son and even had thoughts of killing Daniel the first chance he got. But being the Christian that he was and following the teachings of the church and the Bible, he eventually forgave his son, and they reconciled. Mark eventually recovered, but not after spending a month in the hospital and going through a series of major surgeries. The bullet through Mark's head had deflected off his cheekbone and luckily left his brain intact, but shattered his jaw, which left him unable to speak for some time. Daniel's trial for his crimes were an emotional affair. The persecution insisted that Daniel did not show enough remorse for his crime and therefore deserved the maximum sentence. This, however, did not seem to be the case, as Daniel's eyes were red with tear throughout the entire trial. He insisted that he missed his mom and didn't know why he did what he did. He insisted that he was at the mercy of the game's violent influence. It was also brought to the court's attention that Daniel had tried to seek help on some Christian websites. The persecution then drew the court's attention to the manner in which Daniel had tricked his parents into letting their guard down by asking them to close their eyes. He also brought up the fact that Daniel had initially tried to frame his father by putting the gun in Mark's hand. Mark was then faced with the most difficult decision of either seeking absolute justice or saving what was left of his family. He addressed the court, disclosing how he had visited his son every week during the trial, and how Daniel expressed how happy he was that Mark was alive, how sorry he was, and how he missed his mom. He also insisted that his son deserved a second chance. Daniel had initially waived his right to a jury, so his fate was entirely dependent on the mercy of a single judge. Daniel Petric was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum of 23 years behind bars. Daniel was a level-headed kid who had no history of violence and had never gotten into any trouble before that night. We really don't know for sure what was going through Daniel's mind that day, if he truly was influenced by the video game to do what he did, or if he was just a teen going through a mental breakdown. But one thing is true, the game did have a role in whatever transpired. No one really knows for sure if things would have been different had Daniel actually stopped playing that video game. Thanks for watching. Please let us know your thoughts on this case in the comments, And please don't forget to like and subscribe for more crime videos.